Hi, this is the voice, Michael Chavello. You're listening to the Premium Oddscast, hosted by leading MMA odds maker Nick Kalikas, fight scientist and author of Fightnomics Reed Kuhn, and MMA journalist Brian Heminger. The absolute best UFC betting info, picks, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting, MMAoddsbreaker.com.
Welcome to the Premium Oddscast, presented by Five Dimes and Countermove, your home for fantasy MMA. I'm Brian Heminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts odds maker Nick Kalikas to break down this Saturday's UFC 188 event, which takes place in Mexico City, Mexico. If you're unfamiliar with our format, myself and Nick will be breaking down the fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing our film study for the event. Then, fight scientist Reed Kuhn will step in and offer his expansive numerical insight on all bouts with sufficient data. Today, Reed will be able to contribute on 3 total bouts. Briefly looking back at our last event, our premium package bets for UFC Fight Night 68 went 1-1 to win 0.675 units overall. We won our play on a parlay of the Wade Giagos over 1.5 rounds total with Joe Proctor, but lost our underdog bet on Alex Caceres. However, our free bets for Smilino Rama from World Series of Fighting 21 and the under 2.5 rounds total in the Ortega-Tavares fight both lost. Back to the present, UFC 188 features a 12-fight card in total and will be aired on UFC Fight Pass, FX, and pay-per-view this Saturday night. Let's dive right in. Now, kicking off the preliminary card on Fight Pass, we have a welterweight contest featuring Albert Tumenov, who is 15-2, and Andrew Todhunter, who is 7-0. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Tumenov minus 400, the comeback on Todhunter plus 280, and right now it's minus 420 for Tumenov. The comeback on Todhunter is plus 335. Todhunter, of course, a late replacement fighter. He's replacing actually Urbina. So he's taking this fight on relatively short notice. He's also making the drop to 170 for this fight, which is a bit of a surprise because he's been mainly fighting at 185. He did have a catchweight fight in between that was a little bit lower, but still, Todhunter at 170 is going to be a big, strong welterweight. So one thing we got to just kind of be cautious about with Todhunter is if he can actually make the weight on short notice. We'll see. We'll have to see how he looks. I'm sure he can. That's why he took the fight. But getting into him briefly real quick, I mean, Todhunter's a former Army sniper. He's a big, like I said, strong welterweight. He will be for this weight class for sure. He's a wrestling-based fighter, but he's got a pretty well-rounded skill set. He has some potential really all across the board. So facing a guy like Tumenov in your UFC debut, I mean, the UFC obviously must think that he can hang with him and do well and maybe even pull off the upset winner. They probably wouldn't match him up. Or the reverse side of that is they're just kind of trying to feed Tumenov a guy that he can just destroy, and that might happen as well. But Todhunter's not a slouch at all. I mean, he's actually a pretty decent prospect overall. So this matchup is definitely intriguing. Basically, Todhunter's style, he looks for takedowns. He's got good ground and pound, good control. He looks for subs as well. He has a striking, though, that if he doesn't necessarily have to dive right in for a takedown, he can stay on the feet a little bit. He has a little bit of power on the feet as well. But in this fight against Tumenov, make no mistake, he definitely has to get the fight to the floor. And as far as resume goes, Todhunter hasn't really even faced anybody remotely close to the level of Tumenov either. So that's one thing that you got to question about this fight. I mean, he's finally going to step up into the UFC and face an awesome opponent in Tumenov. Now, Tumenov, of course, we all know, I mean, from seeing his UFC fights thus far, the one thing that he might be a little bit of a problem with that he seems to be addressing is his takedown defense and getting control on the ground a little bit. Alcantara did have some success in his UFC debut. Tumenov's UFC debut, he did lose that close fight, controversial split decision type of fight, but it was because he spent a little bit of time on his back. So he's been addressing that against Lapsley. He didn't have as much success. Lapsley did not with the takedowns. And then, of course, fight by fight, he has been getting better. So Tumenov, not exactly an easy guy to take down. So his takedown defense is pretty sound overall. And then, of course, his striking. Man, is this guy fun to watch. I mean, he can knock you out with either hand. He can knock you out with either leg, and he mixes everything up well. He's got good accuracy and good power to go along with it. So basically what you have in Tumenov is the guy that can stuff the wrestlers' takedown attempts and just knock them out on the feet. And I think that's probably the way it's going to go here more than likely. So rough debut for Todhunter, even though if he does suffer a loss, I think that he does have some potential, especially, if he gets matched up correctly, maybe in his next fight, the guy could definitely win some fights in the UFC. But against Tumenov, I'm not expecting him to do all that well. But at the same time, at the current price, it's hard to lay against a guy like Todd Hunter either. I mean, lay 4-1 or higher might not be the best idea. So this is a tricky fight, but I do lean towards Tumenov because I think that he's just a phenomenal striker and has good enough takedown defense to keep it upright.
The main reason I like Tumenov here is because of how short notice Todd Hunter's taking this fight. I mean, he was only announced as the replacement on June 4th, so he's barely going to get a week to prepare for an extremely, extremely dangerous opponent. And he's dropping down from middleweight to welterweight for the first time. Like, this guy was a legit middleweight prospect. He was in several people's top 10 lists of UFC's unsigned middleweight prospects, so he's dropping down a weight class. That'll be very interesting. I'm going to be surprised if this guy makes weight, especially the first time around. So with this not being a catchweight, it's going to be very difficult for Todd Hunter to suck down all that weight and then go out there on very short notice and take on a guy so lethal in Tumenov. Tumenov has such nasty power in his hands and his feet. Like, you can get knocked out very easily. So Todd Hunter's going to have to be on his A game at all times. He cannot run out of steam in this fight. If he starts to slow down, Tumenov will punish him. So I'm very, very interested to see how he performs. Todd Hunter has the skill set to give Tumenov a run for his money. If he can get this fight to the ground, Tumenov will be in a bit of trouble. Tumenov has worked on that takedown defense, as Nick mentioned, but I mean, that's how he lost his UFC debut. So if Todd Hunter is able to implement some wrestling here and keep Tumenov on his back, take away his weapons, he has a shot. Todd Hunter is a decent striker, but make no bones about it, Tumenov is hands down the better striker with way more power, and he's much more dangerous. So he is a huge favorite for a reason, but Todd Hunter does have the skill set to pull this off. I just don't think that he's going to be able to, especially on such short notice. Maybe if he had a full training camp and maybe another UFC fight under his belt first, this could be a lot more competitive, but I think with the octagon jitters and everything, this is Tumenov's fight to lose hands down. So my pick is Tumenov. Now dropping down to the featherweight division. We have Gabriel Benitez, who is 17-5, taking on Clay Collard, who is 14-5 with one no contest. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I opened Collard minus 280, the comeback on Benitez plus 200. By the way, all lines are courtesy of our sponsor. I didn't mention that earlier, 5dimes.eu. For those of you guys that have been following the podcast, you know that. For those that have not, make sure you guys check out 5dimes.eu. So the line right now at 5 dimes is Collard minus 250. The comeback on Benitez is plus 210. So basically line margins tighten up a little bit, and there's not a ton of action coming in on either guy here at this spot. So line seems to be steady. It's a pretty good fight because out of the tough Latin America guys, I mean, Benitez is honestly one of the better fighters, I think, because he's got such a well-rounded game. He's got some experience to go along with it. And he's not that bad compared to a lot of the fighters that have come from that season that honestly are very questionable in skill set. And just if half of those guys obviously don't even probably belong in the UFC or even on that level. But Benitez is one that you can argue that he does. And at 145, he could definitely win some fights if matched right as well. So he's a pretty complete fighter. He's got decent stand-up skill. He's got a good submission game. He's got good fight IQ. He's got decent cardio as well. So you get a little bit of everything with Benitez, which you like to see that for sure. So he can be dangerous. The guy is definitely a finisher, but I think Collard is going to be almost a step ahead of him. Collard, again, he's another one of these guys that has looked nothing but impressive since coming into the UFC. I mean, they kind of fed him to the Sharks right away in his debut against Holloway, and obviously we know how good Max Holloway has done recently, and he was hanging in there early on. I mean, of course, he did gas a little bit, and Holloway's punishment is a lot for most to take, especially if you're starting to gas out as a fight goes. So he looked respectable in that fight, but then he bounced back with a very gritty win and tough performance against Alex White. And I think that in that performance, you saw a little bit more of what Collard's capable of. And he's, again, a very well-rounded fighter. He's got wrestling, he's got KO ability on the feet, and he's got a submission game to go along with it as well. So Collard, a very skilled fighter. I think he's going to be the aggressor here. I think he's going to be able to bully Benitez. I mean, Collard's always the aggressor, seems in almost every fight. So that's the type of high pace and the type of fighter he is. So he's going to push the pace against Benitez as well. And I think Benitez is going to struggle because if he can't catch Collard either by submission or by KO, he's probably going to lose on the scorecards. And it's not out of the realm to think that Collard actually finishes Benitez because, again, both these guys are capable of finishing fights. And I think that Collard pushes such a high pace that he might overwhelm Benitez at one point or another and possibly get the finish as well. So all that being said, I do lean a little bit more towards Collard. I think they match up relatively well together, but I just think Collard is, again, a little bit younger, a little bit of the more powerful fighter of the two, a little bit more aggressive, and a little bit more capable of winning this fight, either on the cards or by finish. So my official pick is going to be Collard. I think he is a promising young prospect that has a decent amount of experience, and he's only going to get better with time.
Clay Collard, he's not the most technical guy by any stretch of the imagination, but he pushes an extremely high pace. He constantly moves forward. He's always throwing shots, and he just keeps his opponents on the defensive. So I think that's what's going to happen here against Benitez. Benitez is a decently well-rounded fighter, had an okay UFC debut with a submission of Humberto Brown, but overall, I just don't see how he hangs with Clay Collard here. Collard is going to constantly be pushing forward, throwing a lot of strikes, and Benitez just does not have the overall striking ability to withstand that onslaught. Clay Collard is very, very aggressive. So the big thing here is if Benitez was a great counter striker or had a lot of power, maybe he could slip in a good shot and take Collard out. I mean, that's how Max Holloway was able to beat him in his UFC debut. But Collard was able to turn it back and have a very impressive performance in his last fight where he just completely outworked Alex White in a very exciting fight. So I think that Collard can dig deep here against Gabriel Benitez, and as long as he avoids getting taken down or pushed against the fence for the whole fight, as he can stay in open space and continue to throw strikes at a high volume, I don't see how Benitez is able to withstand that, and Collard probably either gets a late stoppage or clearly should win a decision here. So my pick is Clay Collard. Now moving up to the welterweight division, we have Augusto Montano, who is 14-1, taking on Cathal Pendred, who is 16-3-1. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Up in Montano, minus 140, the comeback on Pendred, even money. And right now it's actually Montano, minus 155, the comeback on Pendred is plus 135. So a little bit more movement coming in on Montano. You know, it's one of those things, another Pendred fight. And I'm not saying that. I mean, I like Pendred as a person, as a fighter. I mean, you got to respect what he brings to the table. It's just, it's frustrating when you see him win some of these questionable decisions, though, for sure. You know, or his, you know, depending on which side you are in his fights. I mean, he's losing, then he makes a comeback. I mean, he's just a warrior. So it's frustrating because it's hard to gauge Pendred, because if he basically weathers a storm a lot of times, and he's going to have some success. And if it hits the scorecards, it seems like he wins over the judging as well. So that's what the frustrating part is about Pendred, because overall as a skill set, I mean, the guy is a pretty strong fighter, especially for 170. No doubt about it. He's got some strength. He's got some decent little wrestling. It's not that great. It's not overwhelming, but he definitely can get the fight to the ground if needed. He's got some power in his hands. He's just not super fast or, you know, overly aggressive at times either. And then his defense, honestly, on the feet, it's not that great. And he does get tagged. He does get rocked in fights as well. So it's just strange because, I mean, I think more than anything else, he has some technique and he is a skilled fighter, but it's his heart and his mindset that wins him fights. I mean, he just powers through some bad situations, and he's able to just withstand some punishment and take control and take over. That's what he's going to have to do here against Montano as well, because Montano is one of those guys that a lot of people might not know much about him, but he's a very aggressive fighter, a very good finisher. He's capable of knocking you out. I mean, looking at his debut actually against Heatherly, Heatherly's a pretty solid wrestler. Montano did have some problems early on in that fight. He did get taken down, but he managed to scramble back up to his feet, which is impressive because Heatherly on the ground is a tough guy to handle. Let's be honest. He's no slouch at all. So he was able to, weather some bad spots from Heatherly at times and able to get back in and start striking again. And Montano, one thing that is impressive about him, I mean, he's a little bit sloppy on the feet, but he's very accurate. I mean, he goes to the body. Those knees against Heatherly, for example, were pretty brutal. I mean, he definitely had some good accuracy and good power and good effect with those knees for sure. And again, on the feet, he does swing his hands a little bit wild, but if he connects, he can definitely put you out. He's got crazy knockout power to go along with it. I do think that Montano's UFC debut was actually a little bit of nerves. I think that, looking back at some of his other fights before the UFC debut, I think he's really better than what he showed. I think that he did have those jitters. You could even tell before he even entered the octagon officially, he was a little bit nervous. So I think that we're probably going to see a better Montano coming into this fight, against Pendred. But that being said, he is the type of fighter that he throws so hard and so heavy, he gasses himself out a little bit. So if he doesn't get rid of Pendred early, he's going to have some problems in this fight as well, because Pendred, again, has enough power that a guy that's fading, Pendred could definitely do some damage on the feet, maybe possibly knock him out, or get top position, drop some bombs, of course, too. Pendred, as fight IQ, is very smart, and he definitely has the capabilities of, winning this fight either on the scorecards or by finish. But so it's going to basically come down to this. Montano's either going to win in the first round, more than likely. If he doesn't win in the first round, he's probably going to lose this fight. So it's been a tough spot for me, honestly, to call and pick this fight. It always seems to be a tough spot to pick a Pendred fight these days. I am going to lean, I guess, a little bit more towards Pendred because of the fact that we know he's a little bit more dependable. We know that if he does weather the storm in round 2 and round 3, he'll probably take over, maybe finish Montano. If not, he'll win on the scorecard. So I guess I have to lean a little bit towards Pendred, but my caution is that defense. And my caution also is that Montano definitely has enough power on the feet, or even some submission skill, some sneaky submission skill to finish Pendred. So Montano might be the more dangerous fighter, but I think Pendred is still the more solid fighter, the more steady fighter, and I think he probably comes away with another win here. So I'm hesitant, but my official pick is going to be Pendred.
Yeah, Cathal Pendred has been a guy that you just grit your teeth every time he's fighting because you just never know. I mean, in all 3 of his UFC fights, he has been absolutely blasted and hurt, but he's able to come back, and then in the last 2, he was able to come back and win decisions. The first time around against Mike King, he got a submission. So, yeah, he didn't deserve either of those last 2 against Umalatov or Sean Spencer, in my opinion, but, man, you got to at least admire his toughness and the fact that he, is able to bounce back when he is hurt. That being said, I actually think that this fight is a much more favorable matchup for Pendred than any of his most recent ones. He's not facing a guy that's going to be physically imposing, that can stuff his takedowns really easily, that has a very good technical striking game from distance, like Sean Spencer or even Umalatov with his good jab. Montano's the type of guy that is all or nothing. He loves to blitz forward. He has a good Muay Thai game, really loves to hammer you with knees. When he does have you hurt, he throws a lot of combinations and stays on you. So that's the big question here is, if he hurts Pendred, will Montano be able to finish it? Because if he doesn't finish it, Pendred probably wins the fight. Pendred has that ability to take the fight to the ground. He has decent wrestling. He's not the worst striker in the world, but he's definitely nothing special. He just likes to move forward, and for some reason the judges give it to him when he does. So really what's going to happen here is Montano's probably going to be very aggressive early. He's going to try to finish this fight quickly, and if he can, he's going to win. But if he can't, Pendred either wins a decision or Pendred probably submits him late as Montano starts to run out of steam. I know Montano trains in elevation and all that stuff, and Mexico City's pretty far up there elevation-wise. I just don't think that's going to be enough. It looked like Montano was starting to run out of steam against Heatherly in his UFC debut. So I think this is Cathal Pendred's fight to lose as long as he does not get blistered right away. He just has to weather that early storm. So I know everybody wants Pendred to lose, but I think he actually gets a legitimate win here against Montano, who is a bit overrated after beating a very, very low-tier opponent in Chris Heatherly in his UFC debut. So Cathal Pendred is my pick. Now kicking off the preliminary card on FX, we have Francisco Trevino, who is 12-0, taking on Johnny Case, who is 20-4. Now, Nick, what's the MMA Oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Up in Case minus 300, the comeback on Trevino plus 220, and this line has seen some movement. Case is now minus 360. The comeback on Trevino is plus 300. So a little bit more action coming in on Case, and again, I'm sure people are tying him up into some parlays along with it as well. And this is a pretty good fight. I think more impressed with what Case has been able to do, obviously, and as most of us are thus far. In the UFC careers at least. Trevino's only had one real fight in the UFC, but outside of the UFC as well, I've been able to post some lines on Trevino and on the Access TV show card. So I understand what you're getting with Trevino. I guess I'll start with Case real quick since most of us are aware of his ability. Case is actually, for 155, the guy's fairly long and a very skilled fighter, young too, at 25 years old. It's good that he's been getting some training in with the crew over at Alliance. I think that's only elevated his game to a different level as well. But the guy has a little bit of everything. On the feet, the guy's fun to watch because he uses his reach well. He mixes up his combinations well with his hands and his kicks. He has some decent knees to go along with it. So he's a well-rounded fighter on the feet that he can basically finish you again. Another guy that can impact the fight with his kicks or his hands. So you got to love to see that. Also on the ground, the guy has some submission skill to go along with it. He's capable of finishing the fights on the floor with the submission skill with some decent wrestling to go along with it. Now, he has been put on his back, obviously, in his UFC career, but he's kind of a fighter that is aware of the situation and is able to scramble back out of bad spots at times and able to maintain the fight upright in most cases as well. So his takedown defense, even though he can be put on his back, is pretty decent. It's pretty solid, probably a tad bit underrated, honestly, depending on the situation here. And how he matches up with Trevino, I think his takedown defense will be okay here. And so he's capable of winning on the cards. Case, he's capable of finishing his opponents as well. And that's one thing you got to like about Case is that he has the ability to even finish fights late in his fight, because obviously against Perez, which was a pretty game opponent, he finished him in the third round as well. So had enough power, enough stamina, enough conditioning to get the job done even late. Trevino, on the other hand, he's a pretty gritty fighter. He's pretty strong overall. For 155, he's going to have a little bit of strength. He's another guy that's kind of well-rounded as far as skill set go, but he just doesn't blow you away with anything. Like, his striking's decent. Again, he has pretty decent fight IQ overall as well. So he mixes up. His boxing's pretty decent, I think, with his hands, but it's nothing that, again, can be overly effective or that's going to just make a fighter game planning against you kind of worry or be concerned about the striking aspect of the game. He does mix in kicks to his striking attack as well. His clinch game's not that bad, and he actually has a little bit of underrated wrestling to go along with it. So Trevino is another one of these well-rounded fighters. He's tough as nails. He's kind of tough to stop. He also has a decent cardio. So he's a very game fighter, and I think he's going to come to fight against Case. I just think he's going to be outgunned here. I think Case is just a little bit better everywhere. As far as stand-up goes, I think Case is going to be a little bit faster on the feet. I think he's going to be the more effective, longer striker on the feet as well. I think the wrestling is going to be close, but I do favor Case in this spot as well. I think he's going to slightly have an advantage in the wrestling department. And then as far as the submission skill goes, I think Trevino's not an easy guy to submit. Of course, he's never been submitted in a fight. But that being said, I still think that I give the edge to Case as far as submission goes as well. So Case basically gets the nod almost in every area. I think if it hits the scorecards, which there's a good chance it might, Case will win on the scorecards. And if there's a finish, I honestly don't think Trevino's going to get the finish over Case. I think it's probably Case finishing Trevino along the way as well. So in my opinion, this is a decent step up in competition for Trevino. And Case has got the confidence. He's got, a few fights into the UFC now in his UFC career, so he's not going to be as nervous. And again, I think he's only going to get better with time. I think Trevino is at that point in his career where he's still young relatively in MMA years, but he's 33 years old. I don't think there's too much upside for him. And I think Case at 25, he has a load of experience already, and he's only going to get better again with training at Alliance. And the more he absorbs with good training partners and good competition that he's faced thus far, he's only going to get better each time out. So it's Case's fight to win or lose, and I think he's going to impress here and put on a great performance. So I am going to pick Johnny Case to win this fight.
Johnny Case has really surprised me since he signed up with the UFC. I really thought that he was going to be a bit of a flop because of his poor defensive wrestling against EJ Brooks in his last fight, a fight that he should have lost before entering the UFC. But he went out there and he took on two guys that were trying to take him down repeatedly in his first two UFC fights against Tokadome and then Frankie Perez. And he not only was able to get back up when he did get taken down, the ref never had to intervene, and then he stuffed several of the takedowns as the fight wore on. So his conditioning is excellent. And then he's actually able to use some of his own wrestling and get on top of his opponents and get some finishes due to ground and pound. So I've been very, very impressed with Johnny Case. At distance, he has some good power. He has some winging right hooks that do some massive damage. And on the ground, he actually does have a decent submission game, training his Jury Jitsu with Miles Jury at Alliance. So he's a very well-rounded guy, and on top of all that, he's actually got some excellent conditioning. Trevino, on the other hand, he is more of a scrappy type of Muay Thai fighter with a good conditioning, and that was his biggest advantage in his UFC debut against Rene Forch, where he had to weather that early storm. He got taken down, he got beat up a little bit in the first round, but then when Forch started to tire, Trevino turned it on and outworked him over the next 2 rounds, even got some takedowns. That's not going to happen for Trevino against Johnny Case. Case is going to be the better conditioned fighter. He's going to be the by far more technical striker, the more dangerous striker. He's the younger fighter. There is almost zero advantage. Probably the only advantage Trevino has is the fact that he's naturally from Mexico. He doesn't even train in Mexico, though. He trains in Texas. So I just think that the only thing Trevino has here is he's going to have some crowd support. But other than that, Johnny Case should hands down absolutely destroy him. He is going to be the better striker, better everywhere. So Johnny Case he's my pick to win. Dropping down to the bantamweight division, we have Alejandro Perez, who is 16-5, taking on Patrick Williams, who is 7-4. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Perez minus 150, the comeback on Williams plus 110, and right now it's Perez minus 165, the comeback on Williams is plus 145. So a little bit more action coming in on Perez, but not a whole lot, and line margins have tightened up a little bit here as well. This is another tough fight, honestly. I mean, Perez, obviously the Ultimate Fighter winner, so he's got that going for him. And he actually, surprised a lot of people with his win over Quinones, myself included. I thought that he would perform a little, not quite up to as good as he did. I mean, I know there was some situations with Quinones getting points taken away and all that stuff. But that being said, Perez still fought really well in that fight. And throughout his career, Perez is another one of these guys that from the Tough Latin America show, he's actually pretty solid because he does have a well-rounded skill set. He has fights underneath him, and now he's going to continue to excel with his training, of course. And I think his confidence and his jitters out of the way and, with everything that he's got, a lot of momentum building up for him. And I think he's going to only show better and better fights as his career progresses. He is dropping down to 135 from the show for this fight as well. So I think at 135 he is going to be a little bit better than he even was at 145. So Perez, I think, is a pretty solid fighter. He's another fighter that has a ton of heart and has decent fight IQ. The problem here with Perez is Williams is kind of a beast. I mean, early on, Williams definitely has physical attributes for sure over Perez. I mean, he's going to be the bigger, longer fighter for sure. He's got that wrestling base that you love to see in fighters, especially in this weight class. I mean, he's able to dictate and control where the fight goes. So Williams has a lot of power on the feet. I mean, he's a little bit unorthodox at times for sure, but I mean, he's capable of landing a crazy elbow or even, a solid punch and knocking people out with that aspect. He has a pretty good ground game. He's got good wrestling. He's able to get the fight to the floor. He looks for submissions on the ground as well. So that's impressive with him. The problem with Williams is his cardio, his chin, and I mean, his top side is his fight IQ as well. I mean, if you look back at his debut against Beal, early on in that fight, he was doing really well. It just, by the end of round one, though, you saw a completely different fighter. And then, of course, into round two, he just wasn't the same. And then he eventually got finished with that knee. So another concern here, it's almost similar to the Montano and I think Pendert fight in a lot of ways, because I think Perez is going to have to weather the earlier storm. I think Williams is going to probably win round one in this spot because I just think his physicality, I mean, he's just the bigger, stronger, probably better in some ways overall fighter as far as maybe not all across the board with the skill set. I think Perez has him as far as pure skill set, but I still think that the way they match up, Williams is just going to be the more dominant fighter early on. But the problem is, as the fight goes, I think Perez might be able to take over and take control of this fight. He's a little bit more dependable. You know what you're getting out of him. I think he's going to be hard to stop for Williams. If you don't get him out of there early, I think Perez is probably going to win round two, round three. Of course, he's going to have the motivation about, with the crowd behind him as well. So this is another tough one for me because I do expect Williams to look great early on. It's just, I don't know if I could trust him all the way. So the way these guys match up, I could realistically see Perez finishing Williams in late in round 2, round 3 possibly as well. So I guess I'm going to have to go Perez's way because I think if it does hit the scorecards, then Perez probably gets not on the scorecards. If Williams' cardio and his game plan comes into play, though, he could very well take this fight to the floor. And if his cardio does last, he can kind of grind Perez out along the way. So he might steal rounds that way. But that being said, I just don't trust enough. I think if it does hit the scorecards, it's probably Perez, the fresher, the better fighter of the two. And then he might be able to get a stoppage in, like I said, round 2, round 3 as well. So Williams dangerous early on, but I still am not sold on him quite yet. So I'm going to have to lean a little bit more towards Perez in this spot.
Patrick Williams is a bit of a mystery here. You'd never quite know what you're going to get with him because he is so talented, so athletic, and so powerful that he could win against a lot of fighters that he would be a huge underdog against. And he also has enough flaws that he could go out there and get completely dominated. So he is a guy that has a very good wrestling pedigree. He was one of those guys to come out of Arizona State and training alongside the likes of Ryan Bader and CB Dalloway and Kane and all those guys. I mean, he clearly got the MMA bug from them, but he doesn't train with any of those guys, so that's interesting. Against Perez probably is the more well-rounded fighter overall, slightly, and he definitely has the better conditioning. Patrick Williams is the type of fighter that needs to win quickly because he's so aggressive and a little wild that he just runs out of steam otherwise. I mean, that's what happened in the Chris Beal fight. I mean, that was a firefight for about the first 4.5 minutes, and then something happened. Williams just turned away from the fight, and then Beal was able to land that brutal flying knee knockout. So really what's going to happen here is Williams is going to be very aggressive early. He needs to get takedowns. He needs to land huge ground and pound. He needs to be aggressive in the stand-up portion. And if he doesn't get the finish, I think Alejandro Perez withstands him and then either gets a finish or wins a decision. But that being said, Perez is not exactly a world beater. I mean, honestly, he should have lost the Ultimate Fighter Tough Latin America. It's just Quinones just beat himself with the headbutts and the point deductions and the poor game plan. I just think against a guy like Patrick Williams, who is so dangerous, I think he could actually expose some of Perez's flaws where he can get outworked, he can get beat up, he can get potentially knocked out. So Perez also will have a youth advantage. He's going to be 8 years younger than Williams, so that's another factor in why Williams needs to get this fight over with quickly, especially at elevation in Mexico City. So I am going to very slightly lean with Patrick Williams. I think that he can get out there and just blitz Perez and shock a lot of people. But again, if that doesn't work out for him in that first round, I mean, if there's live betting, jump all over Alejandro Perez if Patrick Williams doesn't finish him right away. So my pick is Patrick Williams, but I'm not crazy confident with it. Now moving up to the lightweight division, we have Efrain Escudero, who is 24-9, taking on Drew Dober, who is 15-6 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
It's a tough fight. Good fight. Another one. Dober opened -165. The comeback on Escudero +125. And right now it is Dober -155. Escudero +135. So line margins tighten up a little bit in small two-way action coming in on both guys. And like I said at the beginning, a very interesting fight because both these guys, I think, are honestly underrated as far as the MMA fan appeal goes. I mean, as far as their abilities go, a lot of people just think, these guys aren't that great, and they haven't really done all that much. And I guess more so for Escudero than Dober. I mean, I think a lot of people believe, after winning the Ultimate Fighter, they were expecting a little bit more with Escudero throughout his career, and he just kind of has let people down at some points. I mean, at least he should have been a little bit better than what he's shown. But at the same time, outside of the UFC, the guy's performed relatively well. He did suffer a loss. So it was surprising to the hands of Dakota Cochran in an RFA event. So that's a question mark in the back of my head. I mean, that if that Escudero shows up here against the Dober fight, I think he is going to probably lose this fight, but he has had relatively good performances throughout his career, and again, especially outside of the UFC as well. So he hasn't been matched the best, I guess, for him in the UFC, but this is definitely a fight that he could possibly win. Because he does match up so well with Dober. I mean, Escudero is another one of these guys that basically has a little bit of everything. I mean, he's not really well known for his striking. I understand that, but his striking is not bad. And against a guy like Dober that doesn't have the greatest defense, he can be effective at times. And then again, Escudero, the best part of his game is honestly his wrestling, his ability to get the fight to the floor, and his submission game is not bad to go along with it as well. I mean, you've got to be more than careful with Escudero on the ground because he's pretty slick and pretty smooth at times. But that being said, at times he doesn't push a high pace, and if he can't get the fight to the floor, a lot of fighters do tend to outstrike Escudero or do tend to control him, and he does get put on his back against strong wrestlers as well. Now, Dober, he's basically a mirror image in a lot of ways. I mean, I think Dober's going to be a little bit faster on the feet. I think he's got, as far as pure boxing goes, a little bit better in the boxing department. Now, defensively, I think Escudero is a little bit better than Dober, though. Dober does he's the type of guy that eats punches because his chin's pretty solid, and so he lets some punches get through just to throw back and try to throw a little bit harder. So Dober is the aggressor on the feet in most cases. I think he pushes a little bit of a higher pace, but defensively it is a little bit of a concern, although he is a pretty tough guy. Now, on the ground, Dober's wrestling is a tad bit underrated as well. I mean, he's got the wrestling to get some takedowns. Even against Escudero, I think he'll be more than capable of getting top position at times. But the problem with Dober is sometimes positional control on the ground. He does give up position, and he could end up on his back in a fight as well. So the ground battle is going to be very interesting between these two. Dober is well-rounded enough that he's very dangerous as far as his sub game as well. Now, against high-level competition, it's going to be different. I think Escudero is high enough level that Dober is going to probably not have an easy route on the ground with him for sure. So it's going to be tough to control Escudero. It's going to be tough to submit Escudero. But I do think that Dober can probably push a high enough pace moving forward, and with his boxing and mixing things up well enough that he's probably going to be busy enough to probably steal some rounds here. And again, if he does end up in top position along the way, I think he could probably get the nod on the judges' scorecards as well. What I do think here, it is going to be a very competitive fight, maybe a split decision type of fight that could go back and forth here, so we could see some questionable scores because they're going to be that competitive. But I do think it goes to the scorecards. I think both these guys neutralize each other out across the board enough that more times than not it should obviously hit the scorecards, and I think we are going to see one of those type of crazy competitive type of decisions. I am going to lean a little bit more towards Dober because I do think his activity is going to be the factor here. But again, another spot that you can't be all that confident with, honestly, in Dober, but Escudero is going to be game and he's going to show up to fight. But I am going to pick Dober to win this fight.
This fight is very close in my opinion, and to me it's all going to come down to who can impose their will, who can get their game plan performed properly. And Efrain Escudero is probably going to want to use his wrestling and pressure, and Drew Dober is going to want to stay in relatively open space and just try to outwork Escudero on the feet and maybe push forward and make Escudero move backwards in the stand-up portion. Dober definitely does land more strikes per minute. He has a high pace. He doesn't really have a lot of accuracy, but he's just that kind of guy that is always pushing forward and trying to throw a lot of strikes, kind of similar to Clay Collard, honestly. But Dober doesn't have very good defense either. So I think what's going to happen in this fight is Dober's going to be moving forward, but Escudero will be responding with a few decent strikes on the feet, and then when Dober starts to be a little too aggressive, I expect Escudero to change levels and get him to the ground. Dober has okay takedown defense. It's not great, and I don't think he's really faced a very good wrestler yet. The big thing here, obviously, was what happened in Dober's last fight. I mean, he was outworking Leandro Silva in the first round to win that, and then the second round he got taken down. He was getting controlled by Silva, but when Silva put on that choke, the ref stopped the fight and called it a win for Silva. Eventually did get overturned, but very, very unfortunate for Dober because he clearly was not unconscious at the time. So I think that he's getting a little bit too much of a benefit of the doubt from the bettors just because he was looking good in that first round, because he was on his way to losing the second round. And it's not exactly a given that he was going to win the third round. So in this fight, I actually think that because Leandro Silva was able to get Dober to the ground without having a lot of really good wrestling, if Escudero is able to use his wrestling, he should be able to take Dober down and keep him down. I don't think Escudero can finish Dober because Dober is a very tough fighter, but I do think that Escudero's wrestling is going to be good enough. He is, a very proud Mexican-American. I think that Escudero is going to be very motivated fighting in Mexico City for the UFC, and I expect Escudero to really push Dober and try to take away some of Dober's strengths both in the clinch and on the ground. And I think Escudero is going to be able to outwork Dober and get that decision victory, and he is definitely going to be my pick. Now, the feature bout of the preliminary card is a flyweight contest between Henry Cejudo, who is 8-0, and Chico Camus, who is 15-5. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
This one has definitely had some movement. I opened Cejudo minus 475. The comeback on Camus is plus 325. And right now the line for Cejudo is minus 1,000. So the comeback on Camus is plus 650. So out of all the lines thus far that we've talked about, this is basically the only one that's had some huge movement, and it really has. It's hard to gauge a fighter like Cejudo because he's so well-rounded fighter, and especially with his Olympic wrestling background. The guy's a stud. I mean, no doubt about it. And the funny thing is, I mean, a lot of people weren't expecting his striking to be as good as it is. So that's why it's hard to gauge a fighter like him, because he's really, I think, impressed more than expectations for a guy in his situation. And he's fighting a guy like Camus, which honestly, Chico Camus is pretty tough. I mean, he showed against Pickett why he can hang with some of the better guys at 125, no doubt about it. His boxing's pretty good. He's been working on that takedown defense, but that's the problem here, obviously, as we all know. Cejudo, the wrestling should have really dominance over a guy like Camus, honestly. I mean, Camus has been put on his back before. His takedown defense isn't bad, but against guys that are able to get it to the fight to the floor steady and often, like a guy like Cejudo, he does struggle. So Cejudo should be able to get this fight to the floor when and where he wants it, and he should be able to control, do some damage along the way, and just kind of dictate the pace of the fight. That's why everybody's betting this fight. I think even if it stays on the feet, Cejudo's boxing is actually impressive enough that he'll hang with Camus, but don't make a mistake. If you underestimate Camus's striking skills, you're not very smart, because Camus has very good accuracy, underrated power to go along with it. So if Cejudo does stay on the feet with Camus, I think that's obviously, it opens a huge door for Camus to get the fight to the floor, to get the fight his way and not possibly land hard punches and knock Cejudo out. Cejudo's going to want to get the fight to the floor as soon as possible. And I think if they start exchanging the feet, Cejudo will probably realize that and probably take him down as well. So I'm not saying Cejudo's a slouch on the feet, but I still think that that's just a dangerous path to victory for Cejudo when he doesn't really have to go that route. So I believe that that's why everybody on the planet's coming in on Cejudo. They think it's probably going to be an easy fight for him. He's going to get the fight to the floor. Although in a lot of Cejudo's fights, he hasn't really been focused on his wrestling. He's been more focused on standing and, working his, showing off his stand-up skill. It's to prove to everybody that he's more than just a wrestler. And like I said, in this case, I wouldn't do that. I would definitely take the fight to the floor and just do what you do best and kind of ground Camus out. I think it's going to be a tough spot for Cejudo to finish Camus. I think Camus is tough enough that he'll probably weather the storm and neutralize any submission attempts or anything of that nature on the ground with Cejudo. But I don't think he is going to be able to stuff those takedowns, and I think he is probably going to get controlled. So Camus needs to sprawl and brawl and hope to knock Cejudo out to win this fight. Other than that, I mean, like most of you guys, I understand it. Even though I set the line low, I do think Cejudo's probably going to get the nod here and win this fight, and it's going to be his wrestling that comes into play and is the big factor here. So I'm going to lean with Cejudo. I think that the guy eventually will get a title shot, and you never know. I mean, the guy's going to be a handful and a very worthy challenger to Demetrius Johnson, no doubt about that. So Cejudo's going to get the win here.
Chico Camus is a good fighter. He's a well-rounded fighter, but he's a point fighter. And I don't think a point fighter can beat Henry Cejudo. Cejudo is so aggressive, so talented with his wrestling, and his boxing has evolved so well and improved to the point where he can hold his own on the feet against just about anyone in the division. I don't see any spot in this fight where Chico Camus can win. realistically, the only people that can defeat Henry Cejudo right now are the ones that can score big finishes in the flyweight division. Somebody that can knock him out. Somebody like a John Dodson, or maybe a lucky punch from a John Lineker, or a Joseph Benavidez, or a Demetrius Johnson. There's like 4 guys that even have the ability to hang with Henry Cejudo right now. And I realistically don't see any chance for Chico Camus here. He just does not have that finishing ability, and I just don't expect him to land a knockout blow or a submission. And there's just no way he can win a decision against Cejudo, because Cejudo is going to be so much more athletic and dangerous than him throughout the whole fight. He showed he can go 15 minutes easy in his last 2 UFC fights, and I expect him to really put it on Camus and make a statement here, because he's a guy that's fresh blood in the flyweight division. Everybody else has already fought Demetrius Johnson pretty much. So, I mean, they got to the point where Kyoji Horiguchi had to fight Johnson a fight or 2 early in his career. So I think Henry Cejudo is a type of guy that they actually want to push to fight for the title. So I expect Cejudo to go out here, make a statement, and then earn like a number 1 contender type of fight with his performance. So Henry Cejudo is 100% my pick. I expect him to dominate, and I'm not surprised whatsoever that the odds have soared the way they have. Now moving on to the main card, we have Tecia Torres. Now moving on to the pay-per-view main card, we have a women's strawweight contest between Tecia Torres, who is 5-0, and Angela Hill, who is 2-0. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
I opened Torres minus 315, the comeback on Hill plus 235, and right now it is Torres minus 310, 255 for Hill. So line margins again kind of tighten up a little bit here in this spot. Hill is getting some decent respect, no doubt about that, because I mean, typically, if you know, Tecia Torres lines are all fairly high. I mean, she gets that kind of respect. A lot of people were banking on Torres actually to win the Ultimate Fighter. But she did get a little bit of exposed on the show, no doubt about it. Her wrestling and her control. Torres is a really well-rounded fighter, though, and she's definitely one of the best fighters at 115 pounds, no doubt about it, on the planet for the women's division. She has a little bit of everything. She does have some decent wrestling. She does have some tremendous stand-up skill. I mean, her movement, her speed, her accuracy, everything to love about Torres on the feet. I mean, she's just a fun person to watch fight. She's aggressive. She pushes a high pace. And she usually gets a nod on the scorecards more times than not. If she can avoid staying off her back or getting controlled by better wrestlers. And I'm sure she's been working on that as well. So, and that's not going to really be the case here against Hill. Hill, as most of you know, is a striker. I mean, has the background in striking. She has very good offensive striking with her kicks, with her hands again. I mean, she mixes everything up well. Another one, she has a very good clinch game to go along with it. She's been working very hard on her to complete and be more well-rounded in her MMA game because she really needs that. So her takedown defense is improving. She has shown some growth in that area, no doubt about it. But on the ground, she is very raw still. So I think that's going to be Torres' biggest advantage here. I think on the feet it's going to be competitive, and Torres can definitely outpoint Hill on the feet as well. But I think that her easiest path to victory again against a fighter like Hill that really focuses more on her stand-up is getting the fight to the floor and possibly looking to take her back and looking for the submission. So Torres is just the better and at this point the more well-rounded and the more complete MMA fighter. I know Hill is working, like I said, very hard, and she's going to eventually try to catch up and be a serious contender at 115. But as of right now against Torres, I just think she's not there. So Hill's best way to win this fight is to try to, again, sprawl and brawl and hope that she outpoints Torres, because it's going to be very hard for Hill to knock out Torres, even though she does have some finishing power, especially for the ladies out there. I mean, Hill's definitely capable of finishing fights on the feet, but against a fighter like Torres, I don't see that happening. So Hill's going to have to try to point her on the feet, try to land the harder shots, and try to do more damage. But I just think that Tecia Torres is going to push a high enough pace, and again, her fight IQ and just the level where she's at right now is just above Hill. So Hill's going to be very game, but I do think that Torres is a decent favorite for the right reasons, and I think she is going to come away with the win here.
I definitely like Tecia Torres. She was one of my favorites to win the Ultimate Fighter, but she actually ended up not having a good enough takedown defense at this point and was just out-grappled by a pair of fighters, Miranda Marcos and Carla Esparza. So Here, I definitely think that Tecia Torres should have the advantage against Angela Hill. She is a very seasoned striker, very adept in karate style. She has a lot of speed. She's good in open space. She lands good counters. She's good when she's the aggressor. She just does all the right things when she's on the feet. The only thing she's really lacking is power, but I think that could come in time. But at this point in her career, she is the type of fighter that just puts a hurting on her opponent, mashes up their face, and then wins a dominant decision when she's able to keep it standing. Angela Hill is a very dangerous fighter. She has more pure punching power than Tecia Torres, absolutely. But I just don't think that she pushes the type of pace that she's going to be able to hang with Torres. Hill was able to look really good in her UFC debut. She was able to completely dominate Emily Kagan, got her against the fence and started really laying into her with some knees and some big strikes. I don't think that's going to happen against Torres. Torres is going to be smart enough to stay away from the fence, try to get in open space, center of the cage at all times, and just really start taking the fight to Angela Hill. Hill is just not experienced enough to deal with a striker like that. Tecia Torres is not Emily Kagan by any stretch of the imagination. I expect Torres to be constantly moving, constantly attacking. Hill will probably be on the defensive for a significant portion of this fight, and unless that she has really improved her counter-striking ability, I think that she's going to get overwhelmed a little bit, and she just won't know how to react properly. So overall, also, Hill just does not have the wrestling ability to take advantage of some of Torres' flaws, because at this point, the only person that I would probably favor against Torres in a stand-up fight is the champion, Joanna Jędrzejczyk. So I think Tecia Torres outworks Angela Hill and probably wins a unanimous decision against her. So Tecia Torres is my pick. Now, moving up to the featherweight division, we have Yair Rodriguez, who is 4-1, taking on Charles Rosa, who is 10-1. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Rosa minus 215 to come back on Rodriguez plus 165, and right now it is Rosa minus 230 plus 190, so a little bit more movement coming in on Rosa, a little bit more action that way, but not too much. This is going to be another competitive fight. Rodriguez, obviously the Ultimate Fighter Latin America winner as well, so impressive overall, because I mean, again, that show from top to bottom was relatively weak, and I know a lot of you guys and a lot of the fans out there don't really respect a lot of these Latin America fighters that have come from that show, but the people that are on this card, Rodriguez, and again with Perez and Benitez, I think are actually guys that have a future possibly in the UFC. Rodriguez is still young. He's only, I believe, 22 years old, and really he showed some impressive skill already on the feet. He has a Taekwondo background. He's a black belt in Taekwondo, but the truth is he's pretty solid on the ground as well. He's well-rounded. I mean, his submission game is nothing to laugh about or underestimate at all. I mean, Rodriguez is one of these guys that does, if you put him on his back, he does look for submissions. He does try to scramble out. He does try to take top position, and he does try to submit you, no doubt about it. On the feet, actually, for being more known as a striker, what bothers me about Rodriguez is he does tend to backpedal at times, which leaves some openings. I mean, he does find his openings. He's a good counter striker, and he mixes up good kicks as well. But the backpedaling, you don't want to see, because that can lose you fights on the scorecards, and he could let people maybe pressure him up against the cage or whatnot as well. And his defense on the feet, he just keeps his hands a little bit too low for my liking and his chin a little bit too high. So that is one concern you want to have. I mean, he's lucky in a way that Rosa isn't an outstanding striker. He's solid in the striking realm, and he's got enough KO power to make life miserable for Rodriguez. But that being said, he's not one of those dominant sluggers that are going to come out there with one punch and just lay people out. So Rodriguez's defense is a little bit of a concern, but offensively, the guy can mix it up well enough that he can do some damage as well. And the one thing about Rodriguez is that I found really good is the way he kind of goes about his takedown. I mean, he uses his stand up a lot to actually close the gap and then look for those takedowns. And in fact, he'll throw, like, even at times he'll throw a little side kick that just gets his body close enough to just kind of wrap you up and trip you down on the ground. So Rodriguez has kind of sneaky takedowns that might come into play here, because Rosa, offensively, with the takedown department and the wrestling department, he's actually pretty good. I mean, he's not bad at getting takedowns in his own right, but he has been put on his back, and especially as the fight goes on, he does tend to fade a little bit, and it's easier to get Rosa on his back. So I wouldn't be surprised if Rodriguez ends up in top position at one point or another on the floor with Rosa. But Now, getting over to Rosa a little bit, Rosa's a very talented fighter in his own right. I mean, of course, he's training with American Top Team, so he's getting quality training partners and quality instruction for sure. The impressive thing about Rosa is he does push a high pace. I mean, he comes forward. Again, he doesn't have the greatest striking out there, but, I mean, he mixes things up again. His boxing's not bad. He mixes in some kicks once in a while as well, but he does push a high pace, pushes forward, and he's not bad as far as accuracy go with the striking. He does look for takedowns, and once on the ground, the guy moves relatively quickly. I mean, if he's on top in top position, I mean, he'll look to move and drop some ground and pound, but looks to improve his position a little bit, and look for submissions as well. Now, even on his back, though, Rosa does get put on his back when he scrambles out of position. That's one flaw I find with Rosa sometimes, is he does get himself out of position and he does let other people start controlling the fight at times. But he's hard to hold down because he's always constantly moving and he's always throwing up submission attempts and just kind of chaining one thing after another. And before you know it, he's actually up on his feet again. So it's very hard to hold Rosa down because of his movement and the way he goes about transitioning on the ground. So it's not easy in that aspect to really control him. But that being said, I do expect a very close competitive fight because these guys match up so well because they both do have decent enough striking to give each other some problems. On the ground, they both have the ability to scramble and catch themselves in possible submission attempts for sure, and maybe even land that finishing sub. So this fight from top to bottom is going to be a really close competitive fight. I mean, obviously they put this fight on the pay-per-view portion of the card. I'm not sure if it's for Rosa or for Rodriguez. I think they're actually featuring the younger fighter here in Rodriguez, and they're kind of banking on him getting the upset win over a talented, decent guy like Rosa. Yeah, it's going to be tough, though. I am going to actually pick Rosa because of his pressure, because I think more times than not, I mean, that pace that he pushes is going to probably do enough to win this fight on the scorecards. But I wouldn't be shocked at all. Again, it's another dog or pass situation because this fight's such a coin flip type of fight, in my opinion, that Rodriguez is going to get in some good positions, and he is going to have enough offense to make life a little miserable for Rosa as well. So I think also Rodriguez might have the cardio edge in this fight. I mean, Rosa's cardio is not bad, but he does tend to slow down a little bit as the fight goes. So the fresher fighter in his home country and the popularity and everything, all the buzz surrounding him and being on the pay-per-view card, Rodriguez might actually come away with this win here. But from what I've seen and what I know, I have to lean still a little bit more towards Rosa, but it is a dog or pass situation.
This fight is on the pay-per-view main card for a reason. I expect it to be a very entertaining contest, especially if and when it hits the ground. Rodriguez is a pretty talented ground fighter in his own right, but Charles Rosa is a masterful technician on the canvas. He throws all kinds of crazy submissions at his opponent, and he chains them together repeatedly until he just connects with one and his opponent can't defend him anymore. He just kind of overwhelms you with submission attempts on the ground compared to how some people on this card try to overwhelm you with their volume striking. So the volume submission attack of Charles Rosa is a real thing. He is a very, very exciting fighter. Now on the feet, I think Rodriguez probably has a slight advantage here. Neither guy is a world beater on the feet, but Rodriguez has a little bit of power, and Rosa primarily uses his stand-up striking to try to close the distance and get the fight to the ground. So I expect if Rodriguez can keep this fight in open space, which is probably unlikely, he would have the advantage. Now, on the ground, the one problem with Rosa is he is so aggressive with his ground game and so, willy-nilly with his submission attempts, he does give up position sometimes. So if Rodriguez is composed, if he comes in there and mentally strong and is able to withstand some of this early assault from Rosa, he could secure some advantageous positions and ride out top position and potentially steal some rounds just because Rosa is so aggressive. Rosa has this style that's similar to the guards of like Charles Oliveira or Brian Ortega, where he is just constantly on the attack. He is definitely not the type of guy that's just going to close his guard and sit there at bottom and wait for the ref to stand you up. He is the type of guy that'll pull guard and just start throwing submissions at you and chaining them together. So Rodriguez does have a good submission game in his own right. I mean, he was able to really outwork Morales in his bout to win the Ultimate Fighter Latin America. But, again, we just saw how bad Morales' ground game really is in his last fight against Quinones, and the fact that Rodriguez wasn't able to finish it really kind of scares me a little bit because Morales is kind of clueless on the ground, and now he's facing somebody that is an absolute beast. So the big concern here is, while Rodriguez is a good talent, He's promising. He's a great athlete. I just think Rosa's a little bit better in most areas, and the aggression of Rosa could overwhelm the defense of Rodriguez. So I expect Rosa to just outwork Rodriguez a little bit on the canvas and either eventually get a submission finish or at least a decision, as long as he doesn't run out of steam, because just that 100 miles an hour style that he has, it could happen. But overall, my pick is going to be Charles Rosa. Now, moving up to the middleweight division, we have Kelvin Gastelum, who is 11-1, taking on Nate Marquardt, who is 36-14-2. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Helping Gastelum minus 405, the comeback on Marquardt plus 285, and right now it's Gastelum minus 440, the comeback on Marquardt is plus 350. So a little bit more action coming in Gastelum's way. A lot of people are going to stick Gastelum, I think, in a parlay, obviously, in this spot as well. If you look at Marquardt, I think he is the more skilled fighter of the two, no doubt about it. He's the more talented fighter. He's the vet of the sport. He's been around for a long time, fought who's who in the middleweight division, even fought studs at welterweight as well when he dropped down. So the guy's been around for a long time. He's accomplished quite a bit in his career, and he's got the skill set on the feet. Offensively, he mixes everything up well. He can be a dangerous striker at times. He has a little bit of power to go along with it. Has some underrated wrestling, and he's got submission skill. So he's a well-rounded fighter. The problem with him is he's 36 years old now. His chin has been clipped so many times. I believe he's not lost like 9 fights by knockout throughout his career. He's not getting any younger. Just age, in as far as MMA years, he's actually beyond 36 as well. So he's definitely towards the end of his career, where on the other hand, Gastelum, he's just getting started in a lot of ways. He's only 23 years old. He's already fought some very solid competition. Of course, he's the Ultimate Fighter champion. So he's got a lot of hype surrounding him, even entering the UFC, especially with his performances, because even to get the Ultimate Fighter title, he had to beat a guy at 185 like Uriah Hall. So moving back up to 185 for Gastelum is not going to be too much of a shell shock. He's obviously had struggles cutting to 170 as well. So this should actually be a very good fit and a very good fight to go back to 185 for Gastelum, because he's the type of fighter that does push forward. He has heavy hands in his own right. Obviously, he has a wrestling edge in this fight. And as far as jiu-jitsu goes, I think they kind of neutralize each other out there as well. So I don't think Marquardt is going to catch Gastelum by sub. But like I said, I think skill set for skill set, Marquardt's just a little bit better, but the younger, fresher, stronger, more aggressive fighter in Gastelum is going to get the job done here, I think, as well, because I think he can clip Marquardt's chin, put him out there. If not, I think he can just push it a high enough pace that he'll win on all 3 judges' scorecards as well. So it is Gastelum's fight to win or lose. You got to feel kind of confident in this spot. I think the only way Marquardt really wins this fight is just inside the distance. If he does kind of get lucky and catch Gastelum in maybe a bad spot on the feet or on the ground, something like that. But more times than not, he really shouldn't. So it's Gastelum's fight to win or lose, and I think he is going to get the job done.
Gastelum is just in a better spot in his career right now compared to Marquardt. I mean, Marquardt is just getting up there in age. Gastelum has a significant age advantage on him here. And even though Gastelum's being forced to move back up to the middleweight division by Dana White, I don't think he's going to have too much of a size disadvantage, because Nate Marquardt's fought at welterweight before as well. And Marquardt will be a little bit taller, a little bit longer, but Gastelum still has that youthful exuberance. He's aggressive. He has a much, much better chin than Nate Marquardt. And I think he handles himself a lot better in clinch situations. I think his wrestling is slightly better than Marquardt's, or at least it's a wash. And the big thing here is if these guys are trading strike for strike, Nate Marquardt's going to go down. At this point in his career, he just cannot take a punch anymore. And that's really, it's forcing him to be very hesitant in fights, because when he has that confidence, I mean, he can go in there and fight with the best in the world. I mean, you saw it against Tyron Woodley. You saw it in his fight against James Tahuno, where he headlined and just looked fantastic in his return to middleweight. But then you see performances where he is just so frozen and locked up and refusing to engage and just waiting for that perfect shot and being really protective. And it allows his opponents to dictate the pace and outwork him and either win the decision, or if they clip him, they finish him very quickly, like Hector Lombard did, or a few other guys. So I'm very concerned about Nate Marquardt at this point in his career. I mean, his last fight against Brad Tavares, it was terrible. I mean, he looked like a shell of himself. He looked just like he did in that loss that he had to Tyron. He looked just like he did in that loss that he had to Tarek Saffiedine, where he just wasn't doing anything, or the loss to Okami way back in the day. So you never quite know what you're going to get with Marquardt, because when he's on, I mean, he can throw combos like no other fighter on the roster. It just depends if he just is able to bite down on the mouthpiece and go for it. And I just don't think he has that confidence anymore. And I expect Kelvin Gastelum to push forward and either get the knockout or win a decision, because at this point in his career, Nate Marquardt is not going to win a decision against any fighter on the UFC roster just because of that lack of ability to engage and force the action. So I expect Kelvin Gastelum to pull this one out. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, you guys mentioned some important themes here. Marquardt is one of the more skilled offensive fighters in the UFC. He does have it all. He is an excellent striker. He's got excellent submissions. He can do it everywhere. But you've also mentioned the downside here, his age, the fact that he's taken a lot of knockouts recently, and he sometimes doesn't fully engage, so he gets frozen up. You cited the Okami fight, perfect example. So this is a tough one to call. I mean, in terms of experience and who is the more skilled fighter, I put Marquardt way ahead of Gastelum. Gastelum is still a young guy, still learning this game. He kind of brute forces his fights so far. He does have power. We saw it against Ellenberger, but usually he's more of a grinder. He uses his wrestling, he mixes it up, and he's been doing quite well with that. And that could be a problem. Round to round, Gastelum could just be out hustling Nate Marquardt. And Gastelum has enough power that he could also hurt Nate Marquardt. But at the current odds, I wouldn't want to lay that kind of juice on Gastelum, because he is still somewhat raw. And to put him in with such an experienced guy, we don't know what to expect from Marquardt on fight night now. He's been very inconsistent. He has looked amazing at times, and he's looked just stunned at times, just not really engaging at all. And just 3 rounds later, he loses, and, it doesn't bat an eyelash. So depending on which Nate Marquardt shows up, we get a very different outcomes here. And really, there is a number of different outcomes actually that make this fight a lot harder to predict, because it could stand on the feet. It could go back and forth. We could see Marquardt aggressive and actually landing his high accuracy, high power strikes. This is a guy who has more knockdowns in his UFC and Strikeforce career than even Cain Velasquez. So Marquardt is dangerous, but he's also vulnerable. So if it goes to the mat, again, kind of a stylistic mismatch, Gastelum's wrestling versus Marquardt's submission game. Tough one to call. I would not want to lay the juice on Gastelum here. I think it's a little bit closer than that, but huge age difference, and certainly 2 fighters heading in different trajectories in their career make Gastelum a more obvious favorite. But I wouldn't want to risk that here. Marquardt could pull off a stunner. It's low probability, but it's still possible.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now dropping down to the lightweight division, we have Gilbert Melendez, who is 22-4, taking on Eddie Alvarez, who is 25-4. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Melendez minus 165, the comeback on Alvarez plus 125, and right now it's Melendez minus 175, Alvarez is plus 155. Line margins have tightened up a little bit, and there has been two-way action on this fight, back and forth, but a little bit more coming in on Melendez here. But it's pretty close at the sportsbooks as well, and it is one of those fights that will draw a lot of heavy action on both fighters, because both fighters have obviously a huge fan base to go along with it. Both fighters get respected from the bettors out there as well. So this is going to be an awesome fight, and I'm really looking forward to it, as most of us are for sure, because you have two very complete mixed martial artists going head-to-head. I mean, we wanted really to see this fight happen years ago. I mean, I'm glad it's happening now, but it's a shame it didn't happen when both guys were honestly a little bit younger, fresher, and kind of at the peaks of their career, because I do think that even though they both have a lot left in the tank, that they are a little bit on the decline at this point of their careers as well. Because again, even though they're 33, 31 years old, for fight years, they're kind of beyond their age as well because they've been in a lot of competitive wars, both of these guys. So their resumes have been impressive. Both have been in the sport for a long time. Both have accomplished a lot. Alvarez, the former Bellator champion. Melendez, of course, the former Strikeforce champion. And both are looking to get a shot at UFC gold. Once again, of course, Melendez did have that letdown fight against Anthony Pettis there, and Alvarez is just basically getting his feet wet into the UFC. So this is a tremendous fight, one that I'm really going back and forth on. It's hard to pick a winner because both these guys match up so well, and it's to be expected, I guess, and that's why we're going to see a lot of steady two-way action. Melendez is going to be a little bit longer. He pushes, I think, a little bit of a higher pace. Alvarez is very active in his own right, but Melendez, I think, is going to be a little bit more of the aggressor in this fight. I think he does have a slight advantage in the wrestling aspect of it and maybe the pure BJJ, but Alvarez is no slouch in those areas either. As far as striking on the feet goes, I mean, both of them are very, very talented. Both of them have knockout power. I think Alvarez has a little bit more pure knockout power in his hands. So that could benefit him a little bit because Melendez, even though he's had an iron chin throughout his career, he's starting to get tagged more. If you look back at his fights, especially recently, I mean, in his last fight against Pettis, even though he was winning the fight before he got caught, in that choke, he was taking some shots. And I was thinking to myself, man, how many of those could he take? And you could tell those shots were definitely affecting him. So defensively, you got to be concerned with what you've recently seen in Melendez. And even back before that, his Diego Sanchez fight, he turned that fight into a slugfest, into a war. It worked out for him, but at the same time, Diego made a little bit of comeback when he rocked him there. So Diego was able to rock him. Pettis, I think, was well on his way to rocking him on the feet as well in that fight. So defensively, not what you expect from Melendez, because overall throughout his career he's been pretty defensively sound. So he's starting to put on more of a show than he is more concerned about, I think, being defensive and being a little bit more cautious. So he's letting it go, which is great from a fan's perspective. But is that the smartest way to fight? I don't know, especially this matchup against Alvarez, because Alvarez does have that kind of crazy knockout power as well. Now, you could say a lot of the same things I just did about Melendez with Alvarez. His defense, Eddie Alvarez's defenses throughout his career hasn't been the greatest. He's been clipped, he gets rocked, he's been dropped, he's been knocked out before. But the cool thing about Alvarez is somehow, some way, the guy has enough heart and enough recovery power that he instantly recovers. I mean, he gets rocked and dropped several times throughout his career, but most of those times he's managed to get right back up. He recovers well and then ends up going on to win a fight. I mean, that's how good the guy is as well. So one concern with Alvarez, though, when that happens to him, is the referee. I think if you don't know that Alvarez is that type of guy that can take some punishment and not get totally knocked out or get right back into the fight and recover fast, you got to be cautious with the referee jumping in too soon and stopping a fight once he does get rocked. So that's always in the back of my mind with the Eddie Alvarez fight, no doubt about it. You got to be concerned about that as well. So both of these guys have some areas to be concerned about defensively, but offensively, I mean, we should see an exciting fight. I think Melendez isn't going to have the amount of success Cerrone did against Alvarez in Alvarez's debut, because those leg kicks were just brutal. And Melendez likes to throw his hands a little bit more than he does, obviously, his kicks. So I think Alvarez is not going to get beat up, especially, with take the abuse he did as far as leg abuse in his last fight. And I think what we've seen in that fight, really, with Alvarez slowing down, isn't what you get in a normal Alvarez fight. So I'm expecting Alvarez to be a little bit fresher, a little bit more into his second fight into the UFC. He knows how important this fight is as well. I think it's kind of a bigger setback if Alvarez loses this fight than it is for Melendez. Melendez could just rebound nicely. I mean, he's kind of more proven, at least in the UFC level, I think, right now than Alvarez is. So it's not going to hurt him as bad if he loses this fight as well. So a really close fight. These guys match up extremely well. I think it is going to probably hit the scorecards. And if we do hit the scorecards, it's probably going to be a split decision type of fight. I've been going back and forth, like I stated. I'm actually going to pick Alvarez in this spot here, because I do think he has more focus. He's got more determination to win this fight. And I think the way they match up stylistically is going to be so close that really it's a coin flip. So it's a dog or pass situation at the betting window as well. I don't think you can lay juice in this fight, honestly, because I think it's going to be that competitive, that close, and then with MMA judging, you just never know. So do not lay juice in this spot. I think it is a dog or pass situation. And in fact, I am going to slightly lean a little bit more towards Alvarez to get the decision here as well.
And I think Eddie Alvarez is a live dog as well. The main thing that I like about Alvarez here is he is just still fighting at such a high level against some really top opponents. I mean, he entered the UFC on a tremendous little run beating Aoki, Patricky Pitbull, and Michael Chandler all in a row. And then the Donald Cerrone fight happened where he looked amazing in the first round and then had an adrenaline dump or whatever you want to call it. He slowed down in rounds 2 and 3 for sure. And Cerrone was able to pick it up and win rounds 2 and 3 and win the fight. And we'll see what happens this time around, but I think he got those octagon jitters behind him. Now, with Gilbert Melendez, if you want to be completely honest, he hasn't looked like that world beater, great Strikeforce champion since he defeated Tetsuya Kawajiri in 2011. I mean, he had an ugly fight against Masvidal, a really close split decision against Josh Thompson, a UFC debut where he had a split decision against Benson Henderson, and then the war against Diego Sanchez that had no business being even close, and he gets dropped in the third round. And then Anthony Pettis, where, yeah, he looked good in the first round, he won it, but he was taking a lot of damage, and then he did eventually get pretty hurt and then choked. So I think that he is in a bit of a decline at this point in his career, and especially because he is fighting so unoften, so inactively, and he just really has not been able to just stay healthy and get out there and get fights. So I'm really interested to see how he performs here against somebody like Alvarez. I mean, this was a dream fight when they were both the champions of Strikeforce and Bellator, respectively. So I'm really glad that the fight's happening. But Melendez, at this point in his career, he's a guy that has a game plan based around his aggressive boxing, where he wings some pretty heavy hooks and big wide haymakers. But he also does back it up with a nice jab, and he likes to put a lot of pressure on his opponents. He'll back them into the fence. He'll just try to keep them moving backwards, and he can also shoot in for takedowns. I don't think the takedown threat is going to be a problem against Alvarez. He has a solid wrestling background of his own, and he was able to stuff anything that Michael Chandler threw at him in that last fight for the most part. And honestly, I think what this fight's going to come down to is just the pure stand-up in open space, and I think Eddie Alvarez is the better stand-up fighter. He has some very technical boxing skills. Melendez shouldn't be way bigger or longer than Alvarez overall, because unlike the Cerrone fight, where Alvarez did have a bit of trouble with Cerrone's reach and Cerrone's leg kicks, I don't think that's going to be a problem here against Melendez whatsoever. The only thing that is scaring me at all is Alvarez's chin. Yeah, he has great recovery, but it does seem like he gets dropped or rocked in every single one of his fights. So Melendez does have some power, and if he connects, he could definitely hurt Alvarez. Alvarez, while he doesn't have the great chin, I think he has much better defense, and I do think that he is the more technical striker, and he's going to be the quicker fighter, the more athletic fighter. Melendez is just getting a little bit up there in age. I mean, he is 33 to Alvarez's 31, so it's not too much of a thing, of a difference, but I really do think that Melendez is on a slight decline, and this could be a spot where Eddie Alvarez steps in and is able to take advantage of that. So I actually think that Eddie Alvarez outworks Melendez, outpaces him, outboxes him, and is able to avoid getting stuck against the fence or put on his back. So I think Eddie Alvarez either wins a decision, or we might see Gilbert Melendez knocked out for the first time potentially as well. So I like Eddie Alvarez to pull off the upset. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, there's a big caveat on this one, and that is that we only have one fight of data for Eddie Alvarez, and that was his debut against Donald Cerrone. So really, his stats don't look all that good. He did get dropped. He landed with average accuracy, which is interesting because Donald Cerrone actually doesn't have great defense. He's willing to get hit because he's so aggressive. So the fact that Alvarez didn't land those counters is a little disappointing because he is a high potential guy. And I agree with you. This matchup should be more even. So a glance at the numbers says, wow, Melendez has a big pace advantage. He tends to outwork his opponents. He tends to put on a high pace. But I think a lot of this is because, relatively speaking, we're looking at some deflated numbers for Eddie Alvarez. I think he should be able to do a lot better against Melendez. First of all, Melendez is definitely not the power striking threat that Donald Cerrone is. His power accuracy, his power rating is actually a little bit below average. But he's been getting by on this volume. And he has good defense. Melendez does have good head strike avoidance. So we'll see. I'm expecting to see something new from Alvarez. He should rebound. This is not his UFC debut, which had a lot of pressure. He was basically trying to get past Cowboy for a title shot. So now the pressure's off a little bit. He certainly doesn't want to lose 2 in a row. He's motivated. Yet, according to the pure numbers, Melendez looks better. But I throw that out the window, at least for this matchup, because we should see a lot of regression to the mean for Eddie Alvarez here. He's going to, I think, perform more to his ability. So I agree with you that he's a live dog here. But you do need to worry about Melendez simply being more aggressive and throwing high volume if Alvarez can't handle or mount a good counter or response to that, which I think he should do a better job here than he did against Cerrone.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now this brings us to the main event of the evening, the UFC Heavyweight Championship match between Cain Velasquez, who is 13-1, and Fabricio Werdum, who is 19-5-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I opened Velasquez minus 475 to come back on Werdum, plus 325, and right now it's minus 485 for Velasquez, plus 385 for Werdum. So not a ton of movement, and again, straight action coming in on the dog, parlay action, and some straight action early on coming in on Velasquez as well. So this is a fight, believe it or not, that is drawing some decent two-way action, and I think will continue to do so. Werdum has looked really fantastic as of late. I mean, you got to give the guy credit where credit's due. I mean, Velasquez, we all know, I mean, he's sitting at the top of the mountain in the heavyweight division for a reason. The guy is the most complete heavyweight on the planet. But you got to give credit where credit due is to Werdum because, I mean, what he's been able to accomplish, we all know that, again, another guy that's been around for an awful long time. I mean, dating all the way back to his Pride days in Japan. I mean, since he's made his entrance into the UFC and Strikeforce, I mean, he's beaten some pretty solid competition. And the guy has always had one of the best grappling backgrounds, BJJ practitioners in the sport, period, not let alone the UFC. I mean, his Abu Dhabi career speaks for itself as well. So Werdum is one of the best submission fighters ever to fight in MMA, in my opinion. That's how dangerous he is. Now, that being said, he's really taken everything as far as training and developing the other aspects of his game. His striking is actually okay now. I mean, that used to be his weakness. If you were able to keep the fight upright against Werdum, chances are you can outstrike him. He always had a tough chin, always had a pretty solid chin, a hard guy to actually knock down. Now, of course, he's 37 years old at this point, so he is getting clipped a little bit more often, getting rocked. I mean, even in his fight against Hunt there, you saw evidence of that. But that being said, I think offensively he's really developed, obviously training with King's MMA and the team that he surrounded himself with. I mean, his striking is getting better, and offensively you have to be a little bit concerned with when fighting Fabricio Werdum these days. So it's not the guy that we're used to seeing in the past where you can, again, stuff his takedown attempts and just outstrike the guy because he is dangerous enough on the feet. He has enough knockout power on the feet as well now. And enough confidence to go along with it that you got to worry about all aspects of Werdum's game. But all that being said, getting back to Cain Velasquez, like I said, head and shoulders above most heavyweights. I mean, Velasquez has knockout power. He's one of the best strikers in the heavyweight division to go along with that phenomenal wrestling. So Werdum is not going to be able to take Velasquez down. We all know that. If he does somehow, some way get top position, I don't think he's going to be able to hold Velasquez down, or, Velasquez will be back up to his feet, quick and he's going to be able to kind of take back over the tempo of the fight if he does get, in a bad spot there. But overall, Velasquez is going to be the one pushing the pace. I think he's going to be the one outstriking Werdum. I think he's going to be the one capable of actually finishing Werdum. I mean, Werdum hasn't been knocked out really in his career up until his UFC fight against Junior Dos Santos and JDS's debut. That was the only time he's been knocked out. And a little interesting side note in that fight, Werdum, we all know, I mean, looking back, he did not take that fight serious. He did not enter, into shape. He wasn't in great shape against JDS at all. And he's taken the sport a lot more serious since that time. So this is a different type of fighter. So if Velasquez is able to finish Werdum, which most of us are expecting, it is going to be pretty impressive because Werdum is not the easiest to finish. But I do think that's probably how it's going to go down. Whether it's a first round, second round, or could be as late as round 3, round 4, eventually Velasquez is going to get Werdum out of there. He's going to land that big bomb and put him out. I mean, the beautiful thing about Velasquez is he also has fight IQ to go along with that skill set as well. So he knows what to expect. He knows what I think he has to be careful with Werdum here, and he's going to have a good game plan, and eventually he's going to probably put Werdum out. So less lightning strikes here. I think Velasquez will retain his heavyweight title. I mean, there is that side note that we all have to consider. I mean, he has been injury prone. He's been out for an awful long time, but I do think Velasquez is going to be back to what we all expect and in phenomenal shape and out there and looking and performing well. So my official pick, like most of us, is going to be Velasquez winning this fight, and probably by knockout at some point.
Cain Velasquez should be the favorite here for a reason. I mean, when he's healthy, he is hands down the greatest heavyweight in the world. I mean, he has an incredible pace he can push. He has the best cardio in the heavyweight division. He has excellent boxing, excellent wrestling, and he just wears you down. I mean, just look at those last 2 fights against Junior Dos Santos. I mean, those are a testament to Cain Velasquez's dominance of the heavyweight division. I mean, Dos Santos was a guy that people thought could be heavyweight champion forever, and it just didn't happen. I mean, Cain just completely destroyed him for 10 straight rounds, finally getting the finish in the 5th round of the last fight. So you really, really have to favor Velasquez when he's on. The problem, of course, have been the injuries. He's had multiple shoulder injuries, knee injuries. He just cannot stay healthy whatsoever. He's finally returning after a very long layoff for this fight. Now, I assume he's healthy, but you just never know. He doesn't always have the best environment at AKA surrounding him. Some of the training with some of the strength and conditioning guys, it always looks a little scary, some of the things that they push him to do. So we'll see. We'll see what he looks like during the week. I expect him to be okay, but you just never know sometimes. Now, Werdum, on the other hand, I think some of the statistics on him are a little bit wonky, mainly the knockdowns. Yeah, he got dropped by Mark Hunt. Yeah, he got dropped by Junior Dos Santos in Dos Santos' UFC debut. But I think a couple of his other knockdowns are more where he just gets hit and he just feels comfortable just flopping to his back and going with the jiu-jitsu and his guard game. So he's very comfortable just dropping to his back, and I think that can get misconstrued as a knockdown. I'm not saying his chin is amazing, because it isn't, but I do think he's only been actually dropped about 2 or 3 times probably in his UFC career. Now, Werdum, when he's on, he has hands down the best jiu-jitsu in the heavyweight division. I mean, the guy tapped out Fedor. I mean, that's unbelievable. And his striking has improved by leaps and bounds since he really started putting in the time at King's MMA with Rafael Cordero. I mean, there was a point where he was just a pure jiu-jitsu fighter, and that's all he was, but now he's a multiple threat. I mean, he was able to completely outwork Roy Nelson in that very impressive stand-up performance, and then the fact that he knocked out Mark Hunt with a flying knee, I mean, that's just not something people expected to happen when he won that interim title. So I think that Werdum is going to be dangerous in this fight. In open space, there's definitely a chance that he is that explosive of a heavyweight athlete that he could connect with something big. Cain, as we know, does have a pretty good chin, but it's heavyweight MMA, and if you get hit by something really big, he could go down. I mean, we saw it against Dos Santos. Even Czech Congo dropped him a few times way back, but that was a long time ago. But you never know. So Werdum is going to be a threat at all times just because of that submission ability if Cain goes for takedowns, and Werdum's a threat in the clinch and in open space due to some very, very improving striking skills. I just don't think that he's able to match Cain Velasquez's pace. Yeah, Werdum got a 5-round experience against Travis Brown, but against Velasquez, he's going to be just putting it on Werdum the whole time, and unless Werdum is able to land that big shot that Junior Dos Santos wasn't able to land the last two fights, or Bigfoot Silva wasn't able to land the other two fights. I just think that Cain is going to be able to outwork Werdum over the course of either a 5-round decision, or he could definitely get a TKO finish. So I like Cain Velasquez to pull this one out. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, they agree. Heavyweight MMA does look weird in a lot of ways. Lots of power in the cage, but also vulnerability because of that power. So when these guys line up offensively, they actually look pretty similar in terms of technical skills. Werdum is actually slightly more accurate, slightly more aggressive, at least in terms of outworking opponents, although he has a much lower overall striking rate. And his power strike defense is just a hair better. The big ways that they differentiate are the power of Velasquez. He has 9 knockdowns, an abnormally high knockdown rate. And then the chin of Werdum is very low at 93%. So you mentioned that some of those may not have been full-on knockdowns. It's not like he's getting knocked out a lot, but he is getting dropped. And whether or not it's because he's pushing 38 and he's had a very long career in the sport and he can't take a punch as well as he used to, or if he's really trying to invite people into his guard, as he tried to do against Alistair Overeem and failed to do so. But in this matchup, I think if they go toe-to-toe, both these guys are going to be connecting. And Velasquez's power is going to be higher. His durability should be higher. So I think if they take it that route, it's probably going to be Velasquez that wins, but would not be surprised if Werdum catches him with an elbow or even a punch, a kick. I mean, Verdum's striking style is very mixed up. He uses all sorts of weapons, which I think is unusual at heavyweight. So either way, I think Werdum is certainly live in this fight. I do expect Velasquez to win. If it goes to the ground, Velasquez has an absolutely dominant wrestling. No one's been able to deal with that effectively. Werdum may be willing to fight off his back and throw a lot of submissions, but I think Velasquez should be prepared for that. And his top game is he should be conservative. He can afford to be conservative and work the strikes, not get too aggressive and walk into anything. So this is Cain Velasquez's fight to lose. He should be returning to form. It has been 602 days since we've seen him last, so who knows? So there are some wild cards here that I think I would refrain from betting Cain straight up for sure. I definitely do not see this going the distance. I think one of these guys is getting tagged at some point, and if either one of them fatigues in the air and starts dropping their hands, I mean, it only is going to take one hard shot from either one of them to put the other away. So I do think there is a chance that Werdum could be pulling something off crazy, but the numbers do favor Velasquez. He is very efficient. He tends to dominate his opponents, doesn't take too much damage. So I think he gets it done here. I'm just a little nervous about that wild card shot because, as we've all said, this is the heavyweight division, and Werdum certainly is skilled enough to pull that off.
So that'll do it for our full event breakdown for UFC 188. Part 2 of the Premium Oddscast featuring our premium bets will be out Friday night following the weigh-ins, so stay tuned for that if you're an MMA Oddsbreaker Premium member. If you'd like to become a premium member, just go to MMAOddsbreaker.com and sign up in the top right corner of our homepage. If we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow at MMAOB Premium on Twitter because that's where we'll post them first. We can also notify you of our free bets via email if you prefer that method. Just send an email to picks@MMAOddsbreaker.com and we'll add you to our free bet mailing list. Also, feel free to like our Premium Oddscast Facebook page. We post articles, show announcements, and plenty of other information there so you can stay up to date on everything from us if you're interested. Special thanks to our sponsors, 5 Dimes and Countermove. Good luck, everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this weekend.